started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first session of the day. Hopefully, everybody had their coffee. My name is Dr. Te Wu. I'm a professor at Montclair State University. I run their project management program out of the School of Business. I'm also CEO of PM Advisory, a project management training and consulting company. Today, we're going to cover a very exciting topic, a new topic in project management. And I use the word new in relative term. Agile was first found as early as in the 1970s around lean management. But today, Agile is becoming a real bona fide approach, an alternate approach to project management that combines the best of lean management, project management, as well as product development concepts. So what we're going to cover today are some of the basic foundation. And then when we have a chance, we're also going to talk about the latest certification, or one of the later certification by PMI Project Management Institute, called the Agile Certified Professional, so the ACP that you see here. So why Agile? If nothing else, it's actually really a sexy term, if you think about it. When I used to manage large projects in corporation, generally speaking, a project could be multiple years, and by the time the customers see the results from the initial, let's say, brainstorming or conference room pilot, it could be a year later and sometimes 2 years later. And when they see the results after that duration, it tends to be underwhelming. So what happened with Agile is that it addresses one of the shortcomings of waterfall method. Waterfall generally means that traditional planning, you see the result at the end, and the end could be years or months later. And with any type of abstract type of work, information management system tend to fall into that. Then when they see the results, usually not exactly what they're thinking. If nothing else, it may very well be exactly what they're thinking 12 months ago, but of course time makes people change. The second reason for it is Agile works. For software development, for a lot of projects that could be cut into modular fashions, you want to deliver the idea of something quicker to the customer, get their ideas, get their feedback, and even if it is wrong, you just fill that small segment, not the entire project. So in a lot of these situations, Agile works very well. Lastly is it's quite flexible. The term is literally is actually quite sexy. Senior management jump on that bandwagon because it almost means anything to anybody. You know, how many people like rigidity or slowness versus agile, swift, adaptivity? So you get that sense. The pros and cons, which I'm not going to go through every one of them, but some of the major pros about traditional project management is that it is very thoughtful. It works actually on most type of projects. It may not be ideal, but it does work. The cons, of course, is very detail-oriented. Sometimes you need a lot of specific details. Changing environment. In the project that I mentioned, a year or 2 years, well, the business environment may change. You may be in a different business cycle. Competition may 2 years ago never existed, now suddenly come up. So any changes to the traditional project management tend to be very painful. And so hence you have some of the limitations. Speed, as the business today is moving towards getting faster and faster, which means you need quicker cycle for that adaptation. Change comes in from not only just the competition, but it also could be regulation. It also could be just a general sentiment, the cultural sentiment. Today, for example, millennials, they have shorter extension span than compared to, let's say, the older generation. Ambiguous. A lot of business requirements that people want, very often customers actually have a hard time articulating it and even making up their own mind. So, of course, if you can't really say what you want and really can't settle what you want, how do you actually build to what you want? And what Agile allows you to do is do it in incremental steps. So finally is the modular. Project management in that traditional sense isn't designed for that modular implementation. It's like building a railroad. You really want to put in the right infrastructure, put in all the rail frames and etc., the signals. But if you want to build a modular like a software, that is a lot harder to do. So Agile excels in those situations. It is really fast. For example, Facebook is rumored to introduce somewhere between 500 to 1,000 changes per day. They actually even came up with a term called continuous development cycle. So it is very, very fast. Change is a part of the process. In traditional project management, once you laid out the baseline, you have the reference point, and any time you have a change to scope, schedule, or cost, you have to go to change board. Well, Agile just take that into consideration. Okay, if you don't like it, well, next cycle we could make something different. Next iteration. Ambiguous. Because ambiguity is a problem in actually all projects, but because you have faster cycle, you can have faster review. So if you don't like this, then in the next cycle, we make moderate changes. So the idea of fail fast, fail early, adapt, and move on. And finally, modular. Agile is built on that principle of modularity. It really helps organizations to achieve faster time to market. And here you actually do see the product development concepts come in, sort of the idea of the minimal viable product. So often in Agile, you ask, what is the minimal that I could actually add some benefits to what customer wants, and then get it to their hands as soon as possible. So let's look at Agile. So that's the benefit and of the pros and cons of the traditional versus Agile. As I mentioned, Agile as a way of thinking actually started pretty early in the 1970s, about 73, around lean management. And the lean management really comes down to how do we do things more rigorously, cut out the fat, and just get to the heart of the matter as soon as possible. So it takes out a lot of the traditional planning cycle. That idea has evolved over the 80s and the 90s. And in 2001, literally, I think, 17 software engineers over booze and skis and, I guess, warm body from skiing decided to pontificate and came up with an Agile manifesto. And that became really the calling for the entire Agile movement since then. And what they said is actually quite nicely. We're uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value individual interaction over process and tools. So really getting to the action, talking to the customer. Working software over comprehensive documentation. So get a working prototype, show it to the customer versus documenting all they want and try to figure out what they want. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation, speaks for itself. Responding to change, then following a plan. And this last statement is important because change in traditional is a necessary evil in some ways. It's not that traditional project management couldn't cope with it, they just don't like it. In Agile, change is a part of the process. That is, while there is value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left. So that became the calling. And since that time, Agile has developed into multiple methodology. Because at the heart of Agile is a principle. The principle is essentially the idea of going to the working software over documentation, working with customer over documentation, worrying about the results, something demonstratable you could feel, touch, see, even if it's working prototype, drawing on a diagram, over pure documentation. There are multiple common methodologies. There's actually a whole list of them. Some of the common ones, for example, are Agile Scrum, Kanban, Extreme Programming. And here I drew this some time ago for my students to illustrate just sort of this broad band of Agile. As you move toward the left side, it's actually a little bit more traditional. And the extreme left would have been the traditional waterfall. One of the earliest formal methodology, not the first, but one of the earliest, is dynamic system development methodology, found in UK, still today used, very popular. DSDM.org is still a very popular methodology used in the large system implementation. And then on the extreme right, you get into really the extreme programming side. And these are cycles measuring day. And Facebook probably even be further onto that side for quasi-continuous development. One of the most common methodology people do hear about is Scrum. Scrum today, in some ways, is probably as popular as any other project management methodology. And it is used largely in software engineering, even though, having said that, a lot of organizations trying to apply Agile, at least the principle of Agile, for a whole range of projects that's beyond software development. When you compare the traditional to Agile, in traditional project management, we often talk about the triple constraint, or the iron triangle, as some people call it. And the idea is that projects are bounded by three primary factors: the scope, the cost, and the time. And generally, we try to fix the scope. So meaning, scope is what the project is about. And once we fix the what we want to do, let's say build a railroad or build a software, we can then figure out how much time it takes, how much cost it requires. And that cost and time could be multiple years, and of course, a lot of money. So it's very plan-driven. It is very logical. It is very intuitive. If you think about almost any task you want to do, generally speaking, you first figure out whatever you want to achieve. Right? If you want to have dinner with your loved ones, is it an expensive dinner or is it a cheap dinner? Is something you're going to get on the run? Right? So the question of what and then dive into time and cost is a very logical approach. Agile flipped that upside down. Agile often fixed time and fixed costs. The scope is the flexible. So in Scrum, for example, Scrum could have different cycles, but very common ones in 1 month. Let's say the question becomes, in 1 month with a Scrum team of 5 people, what can we do? What can we deliver with that 5 people in 1 month that gives us some benefit to the customer? And we build to that schedule. So in the Scrum methodology, in this case, there's also a backlog. So any changes go into the backlog. And essentially in one iteration, 1 month, let's say we deliver 5 things, 3 things the customer don't like. Well, then the next iteration, we go fix those 3 things and deliver 2 more things that the customer wants. And so over the course of a year, you develop more things and more likely that the customer wants because they're constantly validating it throughout the process. So it is a very adaptive approach. If you look at it from a traditional project management perspective, it's like peeling the onion. You get started. You look at what problem am I trying to solve. So if it's a software implementing, let's say, ERP, SAP, well, we want to achieve organization-wide integration, faster reporting. You organize and prepare. You figure out what you want, schedule, cost, resources, so on and so forth. Then you implement the work. And at some point, when majority of the work is done, then you get to closing. Pretty straightforward. In Agile, the idea is now a little bit different. You still do the planning and the organizing, getting started, but instead of implementing in that one big 1-year cycle, you do it, let's say, in 5 cycles of 2 months each or 2.5 months each. So this way, you constantly get into the front of the customer, ask, do you like the interface? Do you like where the button is? Do you like the reporting? Do you like the result? Have you applied it in your day-to-day work, and do you find bottlenecks that we could fix in this next iteration? So over that course of a year, or maybe a little bit longer, you get far more validation and customer feedback. So that is the life cycle comparison. The final thing I wanted to jump into is really looking at the certification. And by the way, if you have questions, feel free. It is rather chilling here, so please. Question?
With those multiple phases of implementation and all the feedback, one of the challenges we have is getting feedback from our client.
Mm-hmm.
Does that tend to present a big challenge?
It does. So actually, where we were chit-chatting, I mentioned Agile requires the support of the underlying organization. What makes Agile challenging, and we didn't really talk about here in the implementation challenge of the organization, is you actually have to have a fairly firm foundation in the organization. They already have to have certain discipline and maturity of that discipline, one of which is decision-making. For example, in the Agile that I described, I mentioned each sprint being a month, and that's pretty average. It usually goes from 2 weeks to 6 weeks. So a month is pretty average. And let's say you have a very consensus-driven organization, often a nonprofit organization. And by consensus, it requires a lot of inputs, a lot of deliberation, brainstorming, and finally achieving some level of consensus. And that decision may take 2 months to make. Well, I hate to say this, there's nothing agile about it. If your cycle is 1 month and a major decision takes 2 months, you could see the problem, right? So you do require a supporting organization, and that's what makes Agile difficult to implement. Without that supporting infrastructure, can you rush certain things? Yes. but you now fall into the same problem as the traditional. Because at some point people say, well, I never bought into it. We never had that deliberative process of agreeing. So you feel like shoveling things down people's throat again. So that's the problem you'll face in that situation. So very quickly, talk about the PMI's answer to the entire Agile. First of all of the major methodology I mentioned before, Scrum, Extreme Programming, actually has its own certification in the methodology. But as a broad management principle, PMI provides the PMI-ACP, Agile Certified Practitioner. It's a good certification for people who are managing an organization that may have multiple Agile methods, especially tied into the traditional. Now, this picture shows the PMI Map. PMI offers total 8 certifications, and you can see Agile is about 27,000 people worldwide. The PMI only shows active. So these numbers are active practitioner, not people who had it and retire. In PMI's world, the granddaddy of all is PMP, which I'm sure a lot of you know, and that is almost approaching 1 million. So this gives you an idea of certification. In terms of the ACP, it recognizes that the practitioner has this broad knowledge in the principal practices and tools. It does give them the foundation to manage almost any of the methods, Scrum, Extreme Programming, Kanban, so on and so forth. So by earning the certification, practitioner really shows that they have that demonstrable knowledge. The experience requirement, generally speaking, is you need at least 2,000 hours of project management experience. And this is more working on the team. And then 1,500 hours of working on Agile team. And this requirement is in addition to this 2,000 hours. From an education perspective, when you look for courses, for many of you looking for courses for Agile, make sure that it has at least 21 contact hours. The contact hours doesn't necessarily mean face-to-face. It could be done through electronically, for example, test simulators or other engaging ways to reach that contact hours. The exam itself is 3 hours, 120 questions. The PMI exam all has the same challenge. It's very fast-paced. 120 questions, 3 hours. If you actually apply adult reading speed, you could barely read through the test questions. Forget about the processing, the analysis, and answering the question. So you really need quite a bit of practice to get your speed up, if nothing else. The domain breakdown, which I'm not going to go through in detail, but they break it down into 7 major steps, and you can see the rough breakdown of questions in those areas. Finally, a little bit about my firm, PM Advisory. We do training in project management. I built my company since 2012 to be one of the most focused in project management training company. We're one of the few, actually we're the first to even do portfolio management. For those of you interested in what that is, we have an afternoon session on advanced project management. Program management, another very advanced area, Agile, project, risk, PMO. I myself actually sit on a lot of the PMI global boards. Our most recent publication is a global risk guide, risk standard for project program portfolio. Question? I think I'm down to 1 minute, so I'm counting pretty well. Let me wrap up by saying Agile is an excellent approach to project management. It complements traditional project management very well, but it often doesn't replace it. The reason I say that is your organization have to have the right infrastructure, people, culture. I just use decision-making as a simple example. It could be a number of other processes. Especially in complex organization today, a lot of teams run different methodology. You may have one project running on traditional, another running on Scrum, another running on extreme programming, a fourth one running on some kind of hybrid. But it does round out the need for modular, flexible, and quick implementation. I recently presented not too long ago in Silicon Valley, and I actually thought being the heart of Silicon Valley, everything would be Agile. I was actually surprised that over 70% of their presenter presentations were actually falling more on the traditional line. Because Silicon Valley realized for large software, even software, Agile fits a great role, but it is one of the many roles. So on that note, I think I'll end the presentation. Thank you very much.